Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for welcoming me to the 9th International Conference on the Future of Women, and for gathering under this year's theme, Feminist Perspectives in Global Contexts. It's truly a privilege to be in Bali with feminist scholars and activists from across Southeast Asia and beyond. I have to say, I was early feminist for the second wave in teaching in New York City at the time at CUNY Queens College. And so I was there for a lot of the very important moments, like the first Congress to Unite Women, the second Congress to Unite Women, the march down Fifth Avenue, all kinds of protests and conferences and so forth. I was so used to, I was very young, I was an assistant professor. This was my first job in the tenure track line. And I was used to being the only woman in the room most of the time. And so when I went to the first Congress to Unite Women, and there were architects and lawyers and doctors and women who were in corporations and you name it, I was just amazed. I had no idea that there were that many women professionals. And this was the early 1970s. And as my career progressed, more and more women became welcome in academia. And when I went to Claremont, a graduate university, again, I was the only woman in the room. There were 3 women faculty. Everyone else was a male. And now, currently, there is a woman president, a woman provost, many deans who are women, many chairs who are women, 50% of the faculty are women. So it is a big change. However, coming here has been just amazing to me. I had no idea that feminism had such a international, transnational reach. I must admit, I am just overwhelmed. It is probably one of the most important moments of my career, my life as a feminist. And I just want to thank you all for being here, and I want to celebrate this moment because this is amazing. It really, really is. So thank you. Really, I could cry. I feel it's so important. Before I begin, well, I want to start with something that I think is very important. The local and the GLOCAL problem women have been confronting for centuries is the problem of male dominance and aggression toward women. And today I'm going to be talking about the dynamics of cultural change and how feminism, that is the belief that women and men should have equal rights, and that's what feminism means. Women and men should have equal rights. That this concept is very powerful, and it is, as we know, a crucial force for progress. And when I talk about women's rights, or when we talk about women's rights, we have to realize we're talking about human rights. What is important to understand and underscore is what women are asking for also applies to a huge range of people, the working classes, the elderly, LGBTQT+, everyone who is overlooked, exploited, and oppressed. So I want to emphasize the fact that women's rights are human rights. And this is a very, very important concept for us to understand. And today I come to you, there's just one other thing I want to say. We know that progress is not linear. And it's something perhaps I was going to say a little later, but I want to say it now. Progress isn't linear. It isn't just a perfect line up and forward and so forth. Sometimes we take one step forward, we take one step back, or 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 5 steps back. It's very jagged and it's very uneven. One generation doesn't necessarily honor the accomplishments of the previous generation. Civilizations, governments pass, they come and go. We have to just keep our eye on the prize, as the phrase goes, and persist. No matter what happens, you don't forget the goal of equal rights for women. You go through very, very hard times, very difficult times, and it can be very painful, but you just have to keep going forward. And I really do want to underscore that. I can tell you now what I realize is a very long life. I never, I was talking to people at dinner last night, and I said, well, when I began the journal, which I brought with me, and I will be talking with many of you about it, the first journal of feminist criticism, and I founded it in 1972, I had no idea that it was really the beginning of a kind of worldwide, a transmission of scholarship and so forth. And what I've noticed over the years is that we've gone through a period of basically American, British, European scholarship, French, to now international. We have articles from every country, scholars in every country, and I want to invite you all, and I'll be talking to a lot of you personally about submitting work to the journal. If you see me, I have cards. I can give you my card so that you can send your work. But as I say, I will also be meeting with people during the conference. So today I come to you as a scholar of American literature and American studies, and I want to begin by telling you exactly what my work has been. It's been focused on women's writing in the United States, especially the ways women writers have used language to claim authority, identify oppression, tell truth, and organize power. This location shapes the examples I bring, and it also reminds me why GLOCAL feminism matters. We cannot speak about gender justice without asking where we are speaking from, who we are speaking with, and how our words are heard and travel. My talk today is titled GLOCAL Feminisms, Bridging Global Challenges and Local Realities for Gender Equality. I will anchor my talk in my own scholarly work on women's writing and feminist literature, and then build a set of practices that I would suggest for GLOCAL feminism, activism, that makes room for teaching, mentoring, research, and publication. I will end with a few thoughts on publication pathways, since many of you have shared a strong interest in how scholarship can circulate. GLOCAL is not just a clever pairing of global and local. It is a method. It insists that global forces are never abstract, that they are lived in particular places and in particular bodies. It also insists that local struggles are never only local. They are shaped by transnational histories, policies, technologies, and economies. GLOCAL feminism asks us to read across multiple scales and to translate between them. The conference materials describe GLOCAL feminism as the intersection of global feminist ideas and local realities. And local realities, and cultural frameworks. And this feels right to me. This seems like a good balance. The global challenges we face are well known: gendered violence, economic inequality, climate crisis, resurgent authoritarianism, displacement and migration, platform technologies that both connect and exploit us. But each of these is experienced in distinctly local ways through specific histories, languages, religious traditions, colonial legacies, and community practices. A GLOCAL feminist approach refuses to flatten those differences, and it also refuses to isolate them. So I will propose a simple thesis. GLOCAL feminism is the practice of translation. It translates between lived experience and collective analysis, between local stories and global structures, between activism and scholarship. And for this, language matters. I've said my own work has been grounded in American literature, women's studies, and the long history of women writers in the United States. And I've written about and taught poets like Anne Bradstreet, Emily Dickinson, and Adrienne Rich, as well as numerous other American women writers. And I have, as you've been told, I've edited anthologies of American women writing from the 17th century to the present. And this work is not only literary, it is political. Women's writing is one of the most durable forms of feminist action. It preserves memory, it names power, it builds community, and it insists on the right to speak. In my book, An American Triptych, and triptych is simply a word for three-panel. It was an art often used in medieval and Renaissance, three-panel work of art. And in this case, I took three poets and I turned the book into a triptych. So it's got three sections about the individual women writers, but also their connection as feminists, even as early as the Puritans and Anne Bradstreet in the 17th century. This book got a lot of attention, and it emphasized a through line that, these are all women who were protesting the fact that authority is so often denied to women. Bradstreet wrote under Puritan constraint, Dickinson under the pressure of domestic isolation, and Adrienne Rich through the political upheavals of the 20th century. Their poems are not only aesthetic achievements, and they are all three brilliant poets, they are also arguments about knowledge, gender, and freedom. My article titled Adrienne Rich, Language is Power, returns to Rich's insistence that words are never neutral. Rich reminds us that the politics of language, determine who is heard and who is erased. Language is power because it is how we name the world, how we construct it, how we resist it, and how we change it. This lesson is crucial for local and global feminism because translation itself is political. What is translated, who translates, what is lost, what is added, and whose frames of reference are treated as universal. Another early piece of mine, Women and the American Revolution, examines how women shaped the political life in a crucial founding moment that is generally narrated as male and heroic. When you think of the American Revolution, we tend not to think that women were very involved, but they were truly and powerfully involved behind the scenes and never got credit for it, of course. This work taught me a lesson that has stayed with me. Women's political agency is frequently expressed in forms that are overlooked by dominant histories. For example, letters, poems, diaries, community organizing, mutual aid, caregiving, and acts of refusal are all political. When we read these texts as political, we learn how to see activism where it is not always recognized or named. And I'll give you a little example of how this lesson can be important. When I first began writing about Emily Dickinson, and I think I started that book in about 1978, it came out in 1984. Emily Dickinson, who you could argue is the greatest woman poet in the United States. She's a very, very powerful poet. Anyway, mostly men had written about her. There weren't very many women scholars at the time. And they always said, oh, she's neurasthenic, she's a little crazy, she stays inside all the time, she never goes out. She's really a very eccentric and strange person. And not one of them had bothered to read her letters, which are published and available. Not one male critic. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to read the work that the men haven't read. So I read her letters, her diary, and so on and so forth. And I realized that she was in addition to being a powerful poet, She was a very powerful feminist, very, very committed to having her autonomy and her independence. And she rebelled against male authority over and over again. And she wasn't neurasthenic. She wasn't agoraphobic. She wasn't afraid to go outside. She went out quite a bit. She did have an eye condition that made her eyesight vulnerable to sunlight. It was painful for her sometimes. So that was one of the reasons she didn't go out. But also, another reason is she was so fiercely independent that the town of Amherst, very little local town in Massachusetts, had trouble dealing with her. I mean, she just thought it was maybe better to leave well enough alone, stay home and write her poetry. And that's what she did. But apparently, no one had ever argued before that she was a fiercely independent person. And as the result, my book got, well, there were many reasons the book got attention, but that was one of the most important contributions, at least in my mind. And I also want to say that feminist scholarship is not separate from activism. It is one of the ways activism survives and grows. It archives struggle, it theorizes it, and it sends it forward. So we at least then have a written record of what some of the important ideas are. And then this conference is about how these ideas get translated into action in the world. And I think that is really crucial. It is the most important of all of our feminist goals, in my humble opinion. I'd like to suggest 3 bridges for a GLOCAL feminist practice. From my literary and historical work, I want to offer 3 bridges that can help us move between global challenges and local realities. These are bridges between activism and but also between communities and institutions. The first bridge is language and storytelling is power. Feminist movements grow through stories. Stories do not merely reflect reality, they shape it. When women write, speak, sing, record their lives, they create a public record that can resist erasure. In GLOCAL context, storytelling does even more. It builds translation across borders. A local story becomes a point of connection, a lens for understanding a global structure, and a strategy for solidarity. This is why feminist storytelling, literature, media are central to GLOCAL work. They keep us honest about location while still making political relationships across distance. Bridge 2, lineage and the archive. Global feminism requires memory. GLOCAL feminism requires memory, as does global feminism. We need to know histories that produce the present, histories of colonialism, of labor migration, of religious and cultural authority, of women organizing and resisting. One role of academic work is to build and safeguard archives of those history. But archives are not the only libraries. They are also oral histories, community records, local newspapers, social media threads, and collective memory. In my anthologies of women's writing, I learned that bringing texts together creates an alternative genealogy of feminist thought. The same approach can serve GLOCAL feminism. Build local archives, connect them to global conversations, and allow each to inform the other. Bridge 3, institutions as infrastructure for the feminist movement. Universities, journals, conferences can be conservative structures, but they can also create infrastructure for feminist movements, as we have seen. When we teach feminist literature, when we publish feminist research, when we hold conferences like this one, we are building spaces that can amplify local struggles into global conversations. This infrastructure matters most when it is used in accountable ways. When scholars share credit with communities, and that's very important. When teaching is connected to organizing, and when public publication is not extraction, but collaboration. And let me explain what I mean by not extraction, but collaboration. Extraction is used to mean taking knowledge, stories, or labor from communities for academic benefit without shared decision-making, consent, or tangible return to those communities. In other words, it treats people as sources rather than partners. Here's some examples. A scholar interviews a local activist, publishes the findings, gains tenure, but the community never even sees the publication, can't access it, and wasn't involved in framing the analysis. Or another example, researchers use women's testimonies in a paper without co-authorship, compensation, or the ability for the participants to review how their narratives are represented. Or another example, a project builds on a local organization's data of reports, but the academic output doesn't credit or resource the organization, and the framing shifts the story away from community priorities. So in other words, I'm suggesting a close connection between scholarship and scholars and their sources. It's a partnership, a collaboration, not an extraction. So that's what I mean by the word extraction. Let me make this concrete with a simple method that I use with students that I hope might be useful here. I call it a GLOCAL feminist reading, but it can also be used for organizing or research. Step one, locate yourself and the issue. Where are you speaking from? What is the local context? Who is affected? This is a politics of location, and it resists the universal voice. So be specific in regard to the details of your source. Step two, name the global structures. What global forces are shaping the local reality? Colonial histories, extractive economies, climate change, migration regimes, digital platforms, and international law. Global analysis does not stop at the local story, it traces the networks that move through it. Step three, surface local knowledge and texts. What stories, poems, testimonies, or artifacts carry this knowledge? What do women say in their own languages? Which narratives have been marginalized? This is where literature and cultural production are not decorative, they are evidence as well as theory. They are concrete details of experience as well as theory. And then step four, translate into action. How can the local story move into public policy, institutional reform, or community organizing? How can global solidarities be built without erasing local difference? This is where activists and academics can work together. Scholars can help with analysis and visibility, while activists bring accountability and strategy. This is a method, not a formula. It is a discipline of attention. It makes us slow down, locate, trace, listen, and then act. And then finally, publication and academic roles, from movement to the knowledge commons. Many of you have asked about publication pathways, and the conference material highlights opportunities for these peer-reviewed proceedings and broader publication. As I said, I'm going to be meeting one-on-one with many of you here. I want to offer a feminist caution and a feminist invitation. The caution, publication can reproduce extraction, and I've already discussed this. If local knowledge is turned into academic capital without accountability and inclusion, we risk repeating the very dynamic we resist. The invitation. Publication can be a form of feminist infrastructure. It can archive local struggle, circulate strategies, and build transnational alliances. It can create shared knowledge commons. So I suggest a few principles for GLOCAL feminist publishing. Consider co-authorship more often. Consider community review, having several people in the community with whom you have talked to review what you've written and give you feedback. And make sure that you give credit where credit is due, shared credit. I want to say something about this. This is really important. It doesn't cost you anything to share credit with other people who are involved in a project, the people you talk to, the activists who are trying to move a project forward. It's kind of like plagiarism, and I do want to talk about this. I will be talking about it in reference to the journal. But plagiarism is when you use the work of someone else, you don't give them credit, and you take it as your own. And as a journal editor, I have to be very aware of this. Because many countries don't necessarily honor plagiarism, that is the ownership of individual property, as much as they should. It's maybe more of a Western idea. I really don't know. But what I say to my students, for example, is it doesn't cost you anything to give credit to those who deserve it. In fact, it doesn't take anything away from you if you give credit to other people. In fact, it enlarges your scope of attention and understanding, and it creates community. So you give credit where credit is due, you get, respect back, and you build a big network. So please remember that. Don't take ever anyone else's idea and pass it on as your own. Just give credit, and then you have a larger group of people. The person you've given credit to is grateful. Other people learn about the wider context of your work, and everybody wins. So that's a really important idea. So also, multi-genre writing, not just academic writing. Academic prose is wonderful. It's a valid form for sure. But also essays, interviews, oral histories, and creative work is also very important. So let's honor all forms of writing. Also, citation as solidarity, as I've already said, it creates a community. So give credit to everybody, especially those writing in local languages. And finally, think of translation as politics. If we translate, we must do it ethically and transparently. Access matters. When possible, choose or negotiate open access so knowledge can circulate where it is most needed. Now, finally, publishers are beginning to recognize the need for open access, where you don't have to pay every time you want to read an article, where you can see it on the internet, where it's freely available. This is happening more and more, and let's just keep promoting that concept. As scholars and teachers, we can honor these practices. As activists, we can insist on them, and as conference participants, we can model them. So finally, let me close by returning to the phrase, language is power. Audrey and Rich taught us that language is not neutral, and my own work on women's writing has shown me how language is a site of struggle and possibility. GLOCAL feminism begins with that insight. It starts in local language and lived experience, and it moves outward to build shared analysis and collective action. In every context represented here, these women, there are women whose words have mapped the terms of justice. Our task is to listen, to translate responsibility, build coalitions, and create the infrastructures that allow those words to move. And we need to persist in our commitment to these goals. Just remember, always persist. Thank you for the work you do and for the stories you carry. I look forward to the conversations and collaborations that can grow from this gathering. Thank you.